All right, today is finally here. Thank you all for coming, and I'd like to give you the road to now for DoD in OT. As you know, 100% of all the OT that we use in the Department of Defense is the same that industry uses. About 10 years ago, DoD had no security focus in this space, and the department had purchased tens of thousands of smart meters that the energy managers wanted to connect to their energy building OT networks. The IT and cyber folks said, no way, as they had no built-in security. And that issue made its way up to the headquarters level, and we learned that we had no OT-focused policies, procedures, or resources. And since then, we've made much progress in changing all of those, and taxpayers rest assured all those unused smart meters have been securely stored away in the big warehouse next to the Ark of the Covenant. In 2016, we created a cybersecurity-related unified facilities criteria. So for when we build new buildings or make upgrades in the department's 500 installations, 4,000 sites, 250,000 buildings, or 400,000 structures, almost all have OT that provides a status or some sort of communication. And did you know that for years, when you heard critical infrastructure, a lot of folks said that only applies outside the base, not on base. And we in the department were struggling to figure out who was going to cyber secure those systems on our base. But that has changed. Congress wanted to know that we had assessed our on-base defense critical infrastructure in which all our missions depend via the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act. So we assessed our bases from a cyber lens, and we have a list of many vulnerabilities that we are mitigating. As all of us know, adversaries target non-secure, easy targets. I recall a classified threat brief to several DoD executives detailing how nation states are exploiting OT. I asked the briefer, what are the chances of detecting an adversary presence on our OT network if we have zero OT tools and skilled people trying to discover that presence? And so the briefer looked at me like I was a donkey with a high IQ and said, zero. And it wasn't that I didn't know the answer to that, but I wanted the executives to hear that because I would often hear, Daryl, our OT always works, so I don't see a real problem. Affirming that briefing, though, the Director of National Intelligence published an unclassified report in 2021 stating that China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea were all actively targeting our critical infrastructure. In 2022, Congress in NDA 1505 language asked the department to let them know that we have mapped our OT networks to our most critical assets and show we are funding the cyber hardening of those assets. As everyone knows, you can't ask for resources if there's no requirement. So we recently developed a control system cyber defense reference architecture based on Mosaic's more situational awareness in control systems framework, which enables industry to provide a capability to each of the functions in the national security framework: identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover. In May 2021, the President signed an executive order improving the nation's cybersecurity, specifying that cyber protections will apply to both IT and OT. Subsequent presidential memo in January 22, the National Security Manager Memorandum on improving cybersecurity of national security, DoD, and intelligence community systems. I know it's a lot, but for the first time, OT supporting critical missions, not just supporting intelligence, can now be classified as a national security system. And meanwhile, the Principal Cyber Advisor position was created by Congress for the DoD headquarters in 2014 and the military services in 2019 because Congress wanted unbiased champions with direct lines to the service secretaries to address all cyber concerns to include IT and OT. So here we are 10 years later. So let's shift to get the insights from the panelists. Dr. Jones-Heath, let's start with you. So what are the services and agencies doing that is different from industry and succeeding? Or what are you trying that is new and different approach than private industry?
Hello, I am Dr. Wanda Jones-Heath. I'm the Principal Cyber Advisor for the Department of Air Force, which includes the Space Force. Daryl mentioned the establishment of this position, and one of the 7 things that we have to focus on is the cyber posture of not just our weapon systems, our networks, but now our critical infrastructure, OT. For this year, I am focused on that and really pushing the Secretary to understand the value add and why we need to protect these critical assets in the OT realm. So when I look at where we are, where we crawl, walk, run, fly, for OT, we are definitely starting to walk. And I say that because we spent an amount of time on weapons and networks, and now we're giving more emphasis in this space. From a people perspective, Daryl being hired as the senior leader in this space, really giving some more emphasis to it. From our process standpoint, we have our governance in place to hold folks accountable. We've been given some money in FY24 to kind of get after a lot of these assessments that we've done across the last 4 or 5 years. And now we're trying to mitigate those vulnerabilities because we understand that, as we look at this space, it's a never-ending story, and we know that the adversary can and will use this as an attack vector. And lastly, I've stood up and partnered with the CISO, the former CISO for the department, understanding how we need to go about to protect this particular space. And then lastly, technology. I stood up a task force, Sentinel Stand, last year to really look at our most prized possessions over in the Indo-PACOM region as we think about how do we keep pace with China and understanding what our critical infrastructures are and being able to articulate that and investments from the Secretary. We've been moderately successful with that. I'm pushing hard. We are looking at how we are segmenting some of our systems. 2 things that I'm putting in place as well, a red team that focuses on this space so that we can emulate the adversary, and then a mission defense team that can help us protect some of these assets as they are critical to how we do business.
Thank you. As the Army Principal Cyber Advisor, Dr. Somar.
Thank you. Good morning. It's great to be here. I joined the Department of the Army about 10 months ago, and this is the first time they have let me out. And honestly, it's the first time I've really wanted to come out, because so much of what my role is and what Wanda's role is, we're strategic advisors to our service secretaries. For me, the Secretary of the Army, for Wanda, obviously the Secretary of the Air Force, that's an inside job, right? We are personal direct counselors across the entirety of our services, not just on installations, but also anything to do with how we organize, train, equip forces to conduct offense and defense in cyberspace. I mean, you name it. If you can put cyber in front of it, we're probably on the hook somewhere late with a memo. So the reason why I wanted to come out and join you here is because this topic is so critical and so important to not just national security, but to our services as well, and especially the Army. Look, we have over 100 installations worldwide. So when you think about, for the Army, a lot of my focus is on scale. That is, we largely understand, what the threat is, what the challenges are on an individual basis. But the scale of the Army and the Air Force and our Navy colleagues as well is so large in terms of what we operate and what we're responsible for. That's the critical thing that I'm in search of. And I would say the overall, our approach on this in the Army is to look across 3 areas: people, technology, and partnerships. Right? People, technology, and partnerships. Got to have the right humans, first off, right? Who can identify and understand problems, can put mitigations in place, can work at a technical level, but also brief and speak it and move quickly. Yes, we can train it. Yes, you can learn it, but we need a critical mass of humans to do that. For the Army, if you haven't met our wonderful folks at the Corps of Engineers, it's an amazing red team we have there that specializes in this type of work. Second, we started with people. Second, the technology. Look, for the cybersecurity pros in the room, you're going to know, right? The IDS, the IPS, the tech stuff is fairly straightforward at one level, but it's applying it in this world of installation and facility security and the specific permutations, again, not just one installation or one facility at a time, but we're a big Army. So we got to be able to do it at scale, right? And that's a challenge. Third, the partnership angle. We started with people, technology, on the partnership side of it. Look, the role of the National Guard in the Army, you would not believe how many amazing people with experience in this world also wear the uniform through our National Guard. So we've got some amazing partnerships already through the Guard with industry. I'm eager to meet you after, talk with you more, and continue to build the partnerships with you and your institutions as well across those lines. So thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Somar.
Good.
Mr. Densfield.
Thank you, Daryl. So you might ask yourself, good morning. You might ask yourself, why is NSA here? All right, most people still think of NSA as this big SIGINT organization or a signals intelligence organization. Why is NSA here on this panel? Well, I was hired many years ago as a young mathematician out of college, trying to understand how can I apply this, and my career has evolved, but the current activities that we have looked at critical infrastructure. And so if you follow what NSA has evolved over the last few years, back in 2019, we stood up the Cybersecurity Directorate. And the Cybersecurity Directorate was led by Ann Neuberger. General Nakasone came in and established that. Very quickly, Ann, the goal of the Cybersecurity Directorate was to bring our understanding from signals intelligence into driving, prioritizing, creating actionable intelligence to secure national security systems. So our focus is on critical systems. We use the term national security systems to identify critical systems, both IT and OT. Daryl mentioned the executive order that was signed back in 2021 to drive the improvements of cybersecurity in IT and OT. And so when the Cybersecurity Directorate was stood up, there was a focus on, and Michael mentioned, partnerships. Partnerships is critical to, and we have partnerships with a number of you in the room and your companies to help us drive changes both within technology, but also in understanding what our adversaries are doing and driving changes into these processes that currently exist. So CSD was stood up 3 years ago. It's evolved. I'm in our organization that focuses on understanding policy, standards, developing the ability for us to collect information, work with our SIGINT organization, and then create actionable guidance for our system owners. And so Dr. Spafford mentioned that this morning. Having a bunch of data is not necessarily the solution, but what is collecting data and making actionable guidance for system owners from the DoD here on this panel look like to help them to prioritize and drive their changes. So when the President signed the National Security Memo 8 this past year, in that memo it focused on implementing Executive Order 14028 guidance, but within national security systems. And so my role at NSA has been to take that and then develop guidance, directives for this broad community. It's working in partnership with the DoD, but it's also working in partnership with the intelligence community. And so as these directives have been developed, we have teams that provide direct support to those system owners who have these national security systems. Part of the activity was for system owners to identify their systems so that we, from an NSA, from a national manager support perspective, to support those system owners. And so you can imagine before the executive order was signed, there were no identified OT or critical control systems as national security systems. Because of this legislation and the executive orders that have been signed in the National Manager Memo, we are now directly engaged with different parts of the services to understand their situations. You mentioned the National Defense Authorization Act 1650. A lot of known weaknesses, but how do you prioritize that? And how do you drive changes, mitigations into these critical systems which support the critical missions? And so the last thing I would leave for you is that when CSD was stood up, we stood up our Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, and that is a outward-focused organization, but a lot of the focus has been on using our the authorities that we have under the DIB, SRMA, to engage companies, large companies that traditionally would support our weapon systems, our space systems. And so my role has been over the past year to work with them to drive engagements with operational technology companies. Not only companies that build technology, but also integrators who design and often maintain your systems. So it's the integrators, it's also the security service providers. So it's a broad set of focus on the commercial community, that the DoD and the intelligence community, but for this panel, the DoD must have engagement to succeed in securing our missions.
Thanks, Michael. And so for those of you who are playing acronym bingo in the audience, so the DIB is a Defense Industrial Base, and SRMA is a sector risk management agency for each of the critical infrastructure sectors. So here we are at a conference with a number of different vendors who offering unique solutions. So what are the services and agencies, the need from these vendors, what different products or services that we are not able to get today?
So I'll start here. It's a great time to be in cybersecurity at large. I mean, we have, congressional backing language. We have the White House guidance. We have, our senior leadership, in the department engaged in this space. What I would ask from you is, and Michael kind of mentioned it before, is the human piece, the workforce. Finding the folks who understand IT, OT, and cybersecurity. Finding folks who can, talk the technical piece as well as, help us with the requirements and things like that. Looking at the workforce that can come in and look at our current infrastructure and say, okay, here's how we can help you from a solution standpoint. We have a lot of legacy, across our installations. For the Department of Air Force, to include the Space Force, we're talking over 140 bases, in all types of conditions. And so having solutions that can work on multiple platforms, whether it's, CE or, civil engineering solutions or other types of critical infrastructure certainly help. Automation, where we can, be able to censor some of our infrastructure to get that data and then use that data to make some decisions on what we should invest in. And then lastly, come with solutions that have been proven. Do you have a testing platform or some type of range that you've tested it on, or even installed in perhaps the Army or the Navy or another federal agency? That would be very helpful.
Thank you. Dr. Somar?
So it's a good question. I think the way I would approach it for all of you is to offer you 3 thoughts on what I'm looking for, or my expectations of folks coming to talk with the service about offerings in this space. The first is it's got to be threat informed. Industry has got to be able to talk to us about the threat in a way that is aware of what's in the public domain. 10 years ago, the government had a near monopoly, not on purpose, but just it was very difficult for folks on the outside to actually know the ins and outs of what our chief competitors were really doing to our country and to our infrastructure. That's not true anymore, right? The information has been democratized. You can Google or search on whatever platform you want to understand what is happening and have very good awareness, but you got to do that. It's your work and the conversations have got to be threat informed to at least some baseline that is aware of the challenges that we're trying to solve for national security. Second, the solutions need to be proactive and preventive, not just reactive. That is, I don't want to be purely in the business of reacting fast to a problem. I want to be in the business of making sure the problem doesn't happen. And so even if initially the relationship or the issue is about better reaction, what's at least the plan then to get to a position where you can preempt and prevent something from going wrong in the first place on a piece of infrastructure? Third, we have to be able to have this conversation about scale, right, that I talked about before. We are big, big enterprises. We have a lot to secure, no kidding, right? So, little efforts are good, but we want to also understand then what that means for the enterprise as a whole. So that's what I'm thinking about, right, when I'm meeting you. And I hope, when you come to town, if you're ever in Washington, D.C., that we can find ways to work with different parts of DoD, NSA as well. And I'll put something on the table for you. If you have junior, professional development talent that you're looking to, I'm not trying to poach them from you, but if you're looking to have them kind of get a little exposure about what the challenges are in government, I expect I can speak for all of us. We'd love to work with you on finding ways to have some collaboration on a personnel level so we can improve how we communicate and understand each other across government and industry.
Thanks. Mr. Dransfeld.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, my career at NSA is focused mostly in the IT world until around 2010. And so at the time, our agency realized that there was not a focus on how do we secure, at the time it was a SCADA device. I didn't even know what a SCADA device was. So I had to look that up. But I had experience in embedded devices, IT devices, with real-time operating systems, with crypto. And so bringing that into this community, the original focus was, okay, well, what standards bodies, how do we try to drive changes in this technology? And it became apparent very quickly that there were standards organizations that were different from the IT community that were very active in the space. So I got involved with the ISA 99 62443 standards development probably about 7 years ago. And at the time, a number of the leaders in that standards body were very gracious to be able to help me to understand what they had done. And so then I got involved in helping them to, as they were revising some of their critical parts of their standard, and using that to drive changes within a number of the vendor community technology. And so that's an ongoing activity. We're trying to work with the community to what does it look like to stand up a testing, and DOE's involved with their Citrix program. What does it look like to develop a conformance testing program so that there's technology that these critical mission owners need that meets a certain criteria? And I'll throw out the 62443 security level 3 and 4. Some of you might know what that is, others won't. But it's improved requirements that are built into technology that are needed to be able to, boot up technology into a secure space, be able to detect when anomalous activity is happening, and be able to collect relevant, I would call it breadcrumbs, so that it can be passed off to our SIEMs so that analysis can be done when anomalous activity is happening in our systems. And Daryl mentioned mosaics. Mosaics is a framework to be able to bring this information together and be able to take action in our critical infrastructure when missions are being impacted. And so that's the first thing I would say. From a security product vendor, I would put out to you that there are a number of growing intrusion detection, protection, threat intelligence companies that have made tremendous improvement over the last few years. And I would encourage you to continue to do that. But what we really need, and Dr. Spafford mentioned this earlier, is not just data, but actionable data. And what does that look like? And what does that look like in our mosaics framework to drive changes?
Right.
And so that's a critical piece that we need you to continue to do that work. There are standard formats that are needed to be followed, coming from more of the IT space, but need to be developed into this critical OT space as well.
Thanks. For those of you who participated in the poll, we'd asked, what do you think the overarching term should be for this space? And overwhelmingly, by a margin of almost 3 to 1, everyone suggested operational technology. So thanks. You all get to have a free lunch after this. The other thing was we've got about, we could do a lightning round with about a minute response each. We had one question submitted. And I know this has been a topic I've heard from others during this event. So how much coordination is done between the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, Commerce, TSA, Department of Homeland Security, CISA, and what if not enough is being done, what would you recommend to improve that collaboration?
From the Department of Air Force, we do recognize that DOE is definitely a leader in the industry. Talking to them quite a bit, I've had conversations with a lot of folks, senior leaders over there. And then CISA, of course, from the 16 sectors, we are tracking a lot of the, guidance and the things that they are highlighting as issues. It's not just, the things that are owned by, states and municipalities, but, of course, we, the Department of Air Force bases are within the communities, and so we need to partner with them to make sure that we are following those guidance as well.
Thanks. Dr. Solano.
So real quick, it's a big government. As big as the Army is and as big as the Air Force, it's a bigger government even. So it's a great question to ask. And yes, there's a ton of formal process, and I know you'd be surprised. There's a lot of meetings. But I think the area where there's opportunity in our operational technology space, so I get a free lunch too, is to actually encourage more personnel swaps between agencies and across government lines so that someone from TSA or Energy can come spend a month working for Wanda and then, can go to CISA and work for Jen Easterly. And then, as part of professional development across the federal government, across civilian organizations, military organizations, intelligence organizations, I think that's a long-term play to actually build those relationships and the collaboration for the future.
So I would say that we can always get better. The government is big, but we work currently through the JCDC with CISA and other partners. One thing and when the Cybersecurity Directorate was stood up, we began to produce what we call cybersecurity advisories. And we have a number of advisories that focus on operational technology. You can find them off of our website, but they're also available off the CISA website. And so we've done dual seal cybersecurity advisories, we've done quad seal. And so as intelligence is being moved out into the community, what does guidance look like from that intelligence and to drive changes? And so that's one thing that NSA will continue to do, the Cybersecurity Directorate will continue to do. It's not only broad advisories, but it's also through our Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, working directly with not only commercial companies, but it's also working with parts of the department, not only the DoD, but across the broad sector space to influence changes in cybersecurity improvements in their systems.
Thanks. So JCDC, Joint Cyber Defense Collaboration, CISA announced this last year, and we had a meeting with many vendors who DHS CISA has asked to be part of. How do we forge and improve these partnerships going forward? So all of us will be here at least for the rest of the afternoon. We encourage you to come up and ask us questions. I know a lot of you are aching to ask Dr. Jones-Heath on now that fighter pilots always used to talk with their hands on how they would track targets. What does that look like now? Going after balloons. All right. Thank you all very much. Have a great day.